the movie Backrooms has been quite surprising because here is this weird, low budget, creepy horror movie that is pacing with big blockbusters, that is outperforming them in the box office, and that is actually gaining more attention from the media, from intellectuals, and also from pop culture. So why is that the case? My sense is that the movie Backrooms, for all its weirdness and all its strangeness, is actually a return to normality. And so how is that even possible? This is Jonathan Peugeot. Welcome to the Symbolic World. So for the past several decades now, we've really been presented with upside down stories. The Spielberg movie Disclosure Day is, of course, the ultimate example where it's pushed so hard that we're supposed to empathize with aliens from the outside that kidnap children and traumatize them. And it's all for empathy and all for good. And we're supposed to understand that the alien and the stranger and the monster is actually bringing empathy to us. And even though we see the alien and we look at him with his weird bug-eyed face and monster, we are supposed to think that this alien that kidnaps your children and initiates them into all kinds of things is actually doing it to save you and to show you how the world is. We're supposed to have infinite empathy. And so, this type of story has been going on for a very long time. Some of them are actually good. We obviously need to have empathy for that which is for the stranger, understanding for the strange, things that are exceptional. All of that is absolutely true. But now it's gone so far that it's become a caricature of itself and a ridiculous idea. And so what the movie Backrooms does is it actually reestablishes the world in the proper order. So what do I mean by that? So the world has a natural order. The world has a hierarchy of importance, right? We have meaning at the highest. Your identity, who you are, is in some ways that which holds things together. And as you move away from that, as you move away from meaning, as you move away from your identity, then things start to multiply and ultimately actually start to break down. They become idiosyncratic. They become strange. They become disconnected. And the more they become disconnected, the more we are lost and we don't know where we are. And the more we are in danger of those disconnected things ultimately to devour us. And so what happens in the movie is that all of this symbolism, which is really a very ancient symbolism, right? It is the ancient symbolism of every single people that understood the sacred center, this idea of the omphalos of the world, right? In Delphi, they had the belly button of the world, right? The center of the world. And as you moved away from that, then things became stranger and stranger until you entered into the world of the monsters, where people seemed barely human. And on the edge of that was the great serpent, right? The great ocean of chaos, which was on the edge. This is represented in every culture. It's represented, of course, in the Bible as well, with Eden at the center. And as you move away from Eden, you have more and more strangeness until you reach the flood. You have giants, you have monsters, and you also have an increase in violence and increase in technology until you reach the edge where everything collapses and falls apart into the flood. So this is just like the natural, image of the world. It's also the difference between life and death, between attention and distraction, and just order and chaos in general. And so what happens in this movie Backrooms is that it reestablishes the natural order of the world in a way that makes sense for the modern viewer, right? That brings all of the elements, the psychological element, you could say spatial element in terms of how we experience the modern life in terms of space, the media element in terms of how, media becomes disconnected from that which it's representing. All of these layers, and of course, the whole idea of how trauma fragments you and how trauma creates behaviors that become disconnected to the purpose for why the trauma happened. This is all beautifully layered in the movie Backrooms, and which is why such a simple story with just a very few characters is able not only to keep us interested, but to give us a sense that we had a a kind of little epiphany into something that is real, although it is one of the stranger movies that I've seen in a long time. Before we go into the story, one of the things that the movie has is that it's a copypasta movie. That is, it's based on urban legends. It's based on these kind of stories that emerged, especially during COVID, when people felt trapped in their houses. This image of a kind of interior space that is disconnected from meaning, an interior space that makes you at the same time feel lost, and as if you are just going around in circles, right? All of these stories that kind of bubbled up during COVID have now been crystallized into a story that does very well to connect, like I said, the psychological, the family, the work aspect, the media aspect, and of course the spatial kind of architectural aspect as well. So what's the story for people who don't know the narrative? The story is about a failed architect. His name is Clark, who his marriage is also failing. And, and it's important that he's an architect because he's someone whose purpose is to create coherence. He's someone whose purpose is to create belonging, right? The sense of a home, the sense of things kind of coalescing together in the right way. But he is a failed architect, and therefore his life, in terms of his professional life, is a copy of what he wishes it would be. It's a lower version of what he wishes it would be. He wishes it would be. And so for that reason, he's also letting his own behavior fall apart. He falls into alcohol, and then ultimately his marriage falls apart. And so, this is the basic idea of the basic narrative, but the concept of the movie, one of the important themes in ancient stories, and a theme that we desperately need today, is the theme of the return of the father. It could be represented as the return of the king, as we see, of course, in the final moments of Lord of the Ring, or the return of King Richard in the story of Robin Hood. But it can also be represented as the return of the father himself. And this is, of course, why the Odyssey is back on the horizon of our storytelling, where Odysseus, after all his long exile, finally returns home. And so the place of the father and the importance of the father is something that has been diminished for many decades, but is one that we have to remember and we have to celebrate once again. And in our recent fairy tale, Little Red Riding Hood, I emphasize even more clearly than in the other stories the return of the good hunter, the return of the good woodsman, who is, in this version, the story of Little Red Riding Hood, who is able to deliver her and his entire family from the wolf who has tried to devour them, who has tried to infiltrate them, and who has tried to pretend that he was one of them. And so for Father's Day, we encourage you to come and get your version of Little Red Riding Hood. But the concept of the movie is that this character discovers the back rooms. And the back rooms, what are they? The back rooms are basically copies of our world. Imagine if you have something real in the middle. And as you move further from that which is real, you have the memory of that reality. And then you have the behaviors that encompass that memory. But you can keep moving away from what is real, and you can keep adding layers of imitation, layers of memory, layers of copying. And the further you get from the purpose and the meaning, the more these layers become idiosyncratic, the more these behaviors and memories become idiosyncratic, and the more they become ultimately dangerous, because ultimately they lose their meaning so much that you could say they become like monsters. They become kind of empty shell imitations of themselves, and sometimes not only empty shells, but hungry ones. Think of someone who develops OCD behavior. Think of someone who's always washing their hands, right? Someone who's had some kind of trauma in their life, and it forces them to always wash their hands. And so, of course, washing your hands is a good thing, but if the washing of the hands becomes disconnected for the purpose of why you're washing your hands, then it actually becomes at first a pale imitation. It becomes a kind of pointless, futile circle, but ultimately it becomes something that's damaging. It becomes an obsession that can take over your entire life. So someone starts to panic because they haven't washed their hands. Someone starts to destroy their hands. Their hands become all irritated and broken because the behavior has now devoured the meaning for the behavior. And so this is, of course, what the movie is about. But what's powerful about it is that it layers all of these in a kind of natural order where all of the different elements of memory, of media, of architecture and participation all break down simultaneously. And so this character Clark, he has betrayed himself. He thinks he wants to be an architect, but he's failed. And so now he's selling furniture from this cheap furniture store, and he's dressing up as a pirate. He's pretending to be a pirate to get attention. And you can tell that he hates himself for it, but he is nonetheless engaging in this kind of pirate-like behavior, creating a character of himself, which is a kind of humiliating version of what it is that he wishes he could be. Not like, I would say, something far removed from that which he wishes he could be. And then ultimately, because of that, you can tell that all of his life is kind of breaking down simultaneously. And that is, of course, when he discovers the back rooms. And the back rooms are these copies. So as you move out of the normal space into the back rooms, the first thing you encounter is the fact that the spaces are intermediary spaces. They look like our experience of hallways and our experience of storage places. And we know that those places, because they don't have a clear purpose, will accumulate residues, right? So think of a church, for example, in a space where you know why you're there and you know what the purpose of the space is. If you started to accumulate a bunch of trash in that church, a bunch of stuff that's random, and obviously someone would remove it because it goes opposite to the purpose of the space. But if you have a vague space, if you have a space that you're not sure what it's for, these kind of empty lots, these empty rooms, these vague storage spaces, then what happens is they accumulate residues from coherent behavior, and that residue breaks down and becomes kind of, like I said, a kind of fragmented memory of something. And so this, of course, happens in terms of, as he moves to the back rooms, he finds piles of chairs that are imitating his furniture store, and he also sees architecture that doesn't make sense, almost like Alice in Wonderland type architecture where doors lead nowhere or there's no logic or coherence. Everything looks like normal architecture, but the reason for the thing, so there's trim in the middle of the wall, there's closets that are there, or different type of furniture that is just not serving the purpose. Some is like half into the floor. So I mean, it's just very reasonable to see that what's happening is that the meaning of the world from which he came, as he moves out into the back rooms, is breaking down. And this is happening, like I said, in terms of space, but then it is also happening in terms of his own life and in terms of other people's lives. And so as he moves further and further out into the back rooms, he starts to hear imitations. He hears, there are like these weird translations of like different voices in other languages that are speaking from a fake human, like this idea of a fake human with like a fake voice, and everything gets faker and faker as he moves out. And ultimately this collapses into video footage. And at first when I saw the movie, because at some point he's like filming with a camera and the entire movie now gets taken into the video camera. And at first I was like annoyed by that because it's just bothersome to watch, another found footage type movie. But I understood what it is that this person was trying to do, was trying to comment on media as something that does that to our experience, that in removing the experience from the purpose, it already moves us into the back rooms. It creates this alienation from the moment. And, it's as deep as the comment that Plato makes in the Phaedrus about how writing makes you forget, how writing as an externalized version of something that's meaningful is already participating in its breakdown and its forgetting. And so, of course, the media is presented as part of the back rooms, as something which is moving your experience away from its meaning and into a kind of breakdown. And so this happens in terms of space, things get weirder and weirder, and then ultimately it happens in terms of the personality of the people. And so what happens to the main character, Clark, is that ultimately he encounters versions of people that are completely broken down, that are shifted. And it's super interesting because I don't know if the director did it on purpose, but there's almost like a commentary on modern art in the movie, because some of the things he encounters, like these piles of chairs and these spaces, they definitely look like contemporary and modern art. And the faces of the monsters that he encounters, they're like broken down, multiple faces, right? Fragmented humans, but this fragmentation looks like a cubist or, a kind of surrealist, or a futurist type of painting. And I think, even if he did not do it on purpose, I think it does end up being a comment on how modern art and contemporary media and contemporary art is sometimes so alienated from the reality that it's supposed to participate in, that it becomes a kind of empty, fetishized world. And this is alluded to some extent, at least I feel like it's alluded to some extent by Clark, because these weird kind of copies and copies of people, he says you can eat them. So he just takes chunks out of them and puts them on the plate as if you could just eat these things. And this idea of entertainment and of consumption as being a reduced version of participation, right? The idea that our memories and our experiences and our stories are just there to be consumed as copies of copies and copies, I thought was a very insightful idea. But what he ultimately encounters is the monster that he himself produced, that is in alienating himself from his own purpose, in creating the character of the kind of pirate furniture salesman. What he does is that monster now haunts the back rooms. This fragment of himself is haunting the back rooms and is going around hurting people. And he thinks that he has control over it. And so when he sees it, he tells the other character, like, don't worry, basically this is me. And then he tries to entreat the pirate, this huge pirate monster, to calm down because, everything's okay and everything. But obviously, as is the case with these fragments of ourselves, like I said, with the OCD example, is that ultimately the pirate eats him. And this process of copying and copying reverses itself, and now the copy is trying to take over. This is, of course, a very old trope in all of our media. It's one of our greatest fears, right? This idea that the copy of you could replace you. It's part of our kind of weird anxieties about robots, about about just the idea of the doppelganger, right? This idea of the evil twin. If you think about the all of this notion of the evil twin, of the copy of you that is actually a kind of offshoot of you, a break off of you, but that could come to devour you. And so this is very important in understanding, because we are always making copies of ourselves. Every time we engage in the creation of different personas, whether you have a persona for going to church, or a persona for your work, or you create these little micro personalities, you have to be very careful when you do that, so that you don't get convinced that that's actually you. Because once you get convinced that that's actually you, what happens is that your persona has devoured you. And you see that, the best example of that is the aging rock star. The aging rock star is the greatest example, because they become a caricature of themselves, and they start to imitate their own costume, like Elvis at the end of his life. His persona had completely devoured him. He became like a copy of a copy of a copy of Elvis Presley, and then this copy ultimately devoured him and collapsed his real self. And so, but what's powerful about the movie is that, of course, there's a whole psychological structure to it, but that what it does is it represents it coherently across our different levels of experience. So both the psychological, in terms of our memories, in terms of our traumas, in terms of our behaviors that are become disconnected to the purpose, in terms of our spaces, in terms of the vague spaces of modernity, in terms of the fact that modernity itself moves away from purpose. The multi-purpose room, the telephone itself is a back room. The telephone itself is a back room because it's not dedicated. It's this non-dedicated space that accumulates accumulates these fragments of you, whether it's your pictures, your text, all of this stuff. And so it is, the backrooms themselves are images of the technology in which we project our being, and we have to be careful, like I said, not to let those projections devour us. And so, it's very powerfully represented because it does it with space. As I've said several times before, architecture, city planning, and space is the most important art, because it is the one that falls into the background of our experience, which makes us experience in the most embodied way what is up and down, what is inside and outside, what is real, what is fake, what is a copy. And so by using the backrooms and by using simple architectural motifs to create that uneasiness of spaces that don't completely make sense, that go on forever, like a labyrinth. Of course, the labyrinth is important in terms of this symbolism. And in fact, the labyrinth is these spaces that only have the purpose to get you lost, right? That only have the purpose to kind of make you go out on the way. So it's a kind of a horrible thing, but there is a little bit of hope in the story. There's not much, but there is a little bit, because every copy that you make of yourself, or every movement that you move out into externalized memory, is actually also a way back. And that's really important to understand. And so obviously a photo of your mother is not your mother, right? And if you're not careful and you fetishize the photo of your mother, then you'll forget, you'll forget what your real mother was. But if you forgot your mother and you see a photo of her, it's also a way back. And so that's why it's important that in the movie, there is this idea that the externalized aspects of ourselves, the ones that can lead us into chaos and into confusion, can also be the way back. And this is, this is shown, I would say, beautifully, as beautiful as you can get in such a weird movie, by the Mary character, the psychologist character. She has a moment where she finds a print of her hand in the cement that she made with her mother when they moved into their house. And so, both her mother and her printed their hands into the cement. And she finds in the rubble of her house, where her house has been destroyed, her mother went crazy and trapped her into the house. And she was obviously very traumatized. But nonetheless, she grabs this moment that was a moment of connection between her and her mother, where her mother was still okay. And she has this little fragment of her hand crushed into the cement. And then as she's fighting the monster at the end, as she's fighting the pirate, she takes this memory, right? That is an externalized memory, that is an object that represents her movement into the back rooms, but she uses it to clobber the monsters long enough so that she can get away and that she's ultimately able to escape. Sadly, if you've seen the movie, you realize that she doesn't completely escape and gets retrapped into the back rooms. But nonetheless, I think this very image of the possibility of these externalized memories, whether it's a family video, whether it's the videos that we film on our phones, that although they are in danger of doing what the video does in the movie, which is to lead us outside of ourselves into chaos and into fragmentation, they also have the possibility, like, stones on the path to go back home. And so that's why I think Backrooms is so powerful. That's why so many people found it interesting. It is a much better movie than Disclosure Day. If you want to go see a movie, go see Backrooms. And here's the hoping that we'll see more of those, more movies that reestablish the proper order of reality, where, monsters bad, monsters eat you on the outside, and that memory can lead you out. But if you remember the good things about your childhood, about your mother, and obviously if you remember God, ultimately, then you can move back into the center, back into the holy place. And so I hope this was useful to help you understand why this is so popular and why everybody's kind of moving towards Backrooms. And thanks for your attention, and I'll talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.
This is Sarah from Hamilton. The imagery of Isaiah is overwhelming. Fire, stone, seed, life and death. What does it have to do with Christ? Join me for my course, The Fifth Gospel, to discover how to read Isaiah in terms of its native language, symbolism. When we read that language along the textual structure of the book, we find the story of Christ, the God who became man to elevate man to divine glory. And we find that story both in Isaiah's most famous passages and in his most obscure ones. The course starts on June 15th and can be attended live or at your convenience. I hope to see you there.